Shabbat Shalom, my friends. Our Sedra is Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and following, Bereshit. Are there any narratives in the Torah more familiar to us than the first chapters of the book of Genesis? We know all of the main characters. The Creator God, who with words and intention calls each successive day into being out of a pre-existent material known as tohu vavohu, emptiness and void, and then step by step crafts us and crafts the universe in which we live. And then there is Adam and there is Eve and the Garden of Eden in which they have been placed. Yes, the garden is also a character in the drama of creation with its off-limits tree of life and tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Maybe Eve was drawn from Adam's rib. Maybe Eve was created as Adam's equal. Maybe Adam was a hapless naif who could not quite fathom where bad decisions would lead him. Maybe Eve was too much of a literalist when it came to the instruction sheet entitled How to Live in the Garden of Eden Without Getting into Any Serious Trouble. The Genesis story isn't exactly blessed with pristine clarity. And then there is the serpent, a strange creature who seems to speak excellent biblical Hebrew and who had 4 legs and who was a subversive source of disruption and disorder. And of course, God was the final character, but not the same God who busied the divine self with creating things, universes and stars, along with the sun and the moon, light and darkness. This God walks about in the cool places of the garden, interacts with Adam and Eve, and frankly displays a rather serious temper. There are all kinds of debates between and among literalist Christians, literalist Jews, and liberal Jews and liberal Christians about whether or not the Genesis story is true. The creationists have their version of truth, which they claim emerges from the literal text. Liberals are much happier finding truth when speaking about myth, metaphor. But I'd like to invite you to join me now in jumping down into a rabbit hole that I would label analogy. Google teaches us that analogy is a comparison between two things, typically for the purpose of explanation or clarification. I'm for that. Please note, the two parts of analogy are not at all to be considered as identical. Let's move on. For most of us, the truthiness or non-truthiness of the Genesis story is an eternal debate, quite frankly, isn't very productive. It's a story, a great story, a universal story, period. I would like to claim that the story, whether it is true or not, is running in the background of all of Western civilization, and that the removal or the disappearance of this story would be massively disruptive to our lives, to our culture, even to our understanding of life itself. In other words, and here's the analogy rabbit hole, I would like to claim that the Genesis story is the operating system without which the hardware of Western civilization could not run. An operating system, I am told, is the software that manages computer hardware along with other software and resources. So, for example, we know that when we turn our computers on, when we power them up, whether it's Windows or Mac or whatever, our computers immediately grab the BIOS, the basic input-output system. That is the operating system of our preference, and up pops our familiar desktop and files and photos and everything else. This process happens automatically in the blink of an eye. Most of us don't even give it a thought. We turn our computers on, and there everything is. Some people, mostly computer geeks and scientists and hobbyists, will probe down below an operating system to explore, to alter, to experiment. They go down and down into the assembly language and the basic programming language until they reach the ones and zeros. And I say, God bless those people, but I have no need or capacity to be one of them. By the way, speaking of God, there was an emotionally disturbed computer scientist who not so long ago created a sophisticated and complex operating system he called Temple OS, which he believed allowed him to communicate directly with God and with Jesus. Okay, let's move on. We no more think of our background operating system than we would look at an icy, cold aluminum can of Diet Coke and think about material grains, individual molecules, atoms, subatomic particles, and then quantum particles. We just pop the can open and drink. In so many ways, the stories of Genesis are the operating system of Western culture. Wherever we get our understandings of life and the universe, chapters 1 and 2 of the book of Genesis are running in the backgrounds of our minds without any conscious awareness on our part. When we try to conceptualize human responsibility for our planet, those same chapters are part of our operating system, jostling with the science we learn, prodding us along with the moralists we study, challenging us without our in any way becoming consciously aware of what is going on. When we try to grow our understanding of gender and of sexuality, no matter what our views of human origins, Adam and Eve, are there. How many genders? Is Genesis demanding a binary view of biology, or are there sparks of an awareness that what we call common wisdom may not be so wise? After all, it's in the operating system. And what about human nature? Original sin, or sin as a product of freely made human choices, or sin as an inescapable part of human existence, or sin as a testing ground for moral development. We may never use those specific categories while discussing moral theory, but nevertheless they are running 24/7 in the background of our lives. Genesis, early chapters. When we think about the future of humanity, will it only be found as we terraform Mars, riding around in Teslas provided by Elon Musk? Or can we create a culture here on Earth in which lions and lambs, conservatives and liberals can work together to save our planet by restoring it to something resembling what? One of the characters, the Garden of Eden. The stories are so very familiar. The main characters are so very familiar. They are so familiar that we don't spend much time at all thinking about them. But like an operating system, Genesis runs in the back reaches of our conscious minds all the time, 24/7, giving us language, images, projecting the most vital of human concerns, making certain that we are connected to our very origins without ever occupying our conscious thoughts. So let's read these chapters this week and what follows with profound understanding, with profound gratitude, and maybe even with some well-deserved awe. For these chapters are foundational to the very people we are. Shabbat Shalom. And this week, give a shout out to the operating systems of your choice. See you next week.